Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and warming to my theme of last week, I've been wondering if Stephen Sondheim's musical Company had been written in the Victorian age, that it might now be better known as Variations on the Theme of Anxiety Regarding the Anticipation of Joining the Marriage Market. Fairly accurate, but perhaps not quite as snappy as our 20th century version. And being snappy is what I'm going to have to try to be today, because we have a bumper episode for you today here on Musical Talk, when we're going to be looking at two very different shows, but they are linked by two things. The most obvious thing is that we're about to talk about them. Hooray! And the second thing, perhaps more usefully, is the fact that they are shows that you can still see. Now, last week you heard the wonderful Tom Arnold talking about his delight that Jekyll Versus Hyde, the wonderful Edinburgh Festival Fringe musical of 2019, was available in its soundtrack or score recording. And we all know the controversy about whether it's a soundtrack or a score recording, but I'm not going to get into that today. But whatever it is, and however you define it, you can hear the show Jekyll Versus Hyde by Laurence, Owen and Lindsay Sharman online on Spotify and elsewhere. And we'll be talking about that in just a minute. But if you're aware of Andrew Lloyd Webber's excellent website, The Shows Must Go On, you will have had this very last weekend, as I record this, the chance to see the London production of 42nd Street, which unbelievably closed almost 2 years ago now, but still comes up as fresh as a daisy, because that is a show which is a perennial. And I do hope you had a chance to see it. If you didn't, interestingly, you still can if you join the subscription website Broadway HD. And I would strongly recommend that you give it a whirl, because it is one of those musicals that allows you to forget all the cares of the world. And I don't know if you've noticed, the world has had a number of cares this year. So later in this programme, towards the end, you'll have another chance to hear my 10-point review of that virtually recorded production of 42nd Street. But before then, we're going to hear two different takes on Jekyll Versus Hyde by Laurence Owen and Lindsay Sharman. There'll be a chance to hear the conversation I had with noted composer Michael Gordon Shapiro about that show, because Mike, just like me and Tom, adored seeing Jekyll Versus Hyde, and we all have a huge amount of respect for Laurence and Lindsay and their shows. So that's a chance to hear Mike and Mai's review of Jekyll Versus Hyde, which we recorded last year at the end of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2019. So it's our contemporary take on it. But before that, there's a chance to hear the interview I conducted with Lindsay and Laurence immediately after one of the shows. And as with all conversations with Lindsay and Laurence, it's entertaining, it's funny and insightful. And it's about their show Jekyll Versus Hyde. And cleverly, their version, like the original, is not just entertaining in its own right, but it is also an investigation into duality. And if that sounds heavy, I can assure you it isn't. And you'll get that from the conversations you hear today. So, what are we going to give you? Well, we're going to start with two songs from that show which represent the duality. The concept of the piece, partly, and to explain it now, is that Laurence is trying to create a serious adaptation of Jekyll and Hyde, and Lindsay is trying to revert to a less serious version of Jekyll and Hyde that they had written previously, which was much more brash and crass, and then it's the fight for supremacy between the two approaches. And to illustrate that perfectly, Laurence has allowed us to play two songs from that show, and I'm going to play them back to back. The first is from Strange Case, which is the fictional serious adaptation of Jekyll and Hyde within Jekyll Versus Hyde, and that'll be followed up with a much more raucous number called Whoa 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 from Hyde-ing, the more ridiculous and brash version of Jekyll and Hyde, which Lindsay is promoting. And you'll be able to hear the difference in tone and feel in those songs, which will help you understand what we're talking about when you next then hear Laurence and Lindsay in conversation with me in Edinburgh in 2019. After which, you'll get to hear Mike Shapiro and me in conversation talking about the show. And then finally, we'll round the episode off with a 10-point review of the wonderful perennial show 42nd Street. That's plenty to get your teeth into. It's time to get these shows on the road.
Why is it good is praised and bad is shunned, when bad comes naturally to everyone? Why do we judge the evil that men do, when we ourselves have evil in us too? And is it really in God's plan that we make pains to quash the natural state of man? Well, not I will tolerate this fantasy no more. I will be freer than man's ever been before, free to explore the other side of humankind, which for so long has been mistrusted and maligned, and which feckless laws forbid. With just one draft, I shall ascend into a playground of the id. My dear friend, how I've longed to meet you. I can hardly bear to look upon your face. You're perfect. My friend, the things that I will do with you, or should I say the things you'll make me do? You think my thoughts, but do you speak my tongue? Quick, Jekyll, speak!
Cogito ergo sum.
A voice as ugly as a voice can be. I dared not hope for such depravity. I am invisible behind your face, this flesh and bone, the perfect hiding place. The perfect hiding place. But of course, you must be named, and for the service you provide, I shall call you Mr. Hyde.
Musical talk.
Picture the scene. The staff room of St. Bart's High School somewhere in America. Dr. Jekyll, head of chemistry, chats to his pals, gym teacher Mr. Uddison, and substitute physics teacher Victor Frankenstein.
Hey dudes, what's up? It's everyone's favorite chemistry teacher, Dr. Jekyll.
J-Man, bro, where you been? Checking out the cheerleaders at practice?
Whoa.
High five!
High five! That's your trick, you old dog. I've only got eyes for one little lady, Juicy Lucy Lanyon.
Oh yeah, you had a date with Dr. Lanyon last night. How did it go?
Oh, hey, Victor. Oh, what's that smell? Did you fart?
No, you splashed me with sulfur as a joke, remember?
Oh, yeah. Haha, that was pretty funny. Anyway, let me tell you about my date. Went to the Science Museum with my special lady. It's intellectual. They got a special exhibit on how you make babies. It's also sexual. I could tell by the sweat on her face that her heart was starting to race.
Whoa, 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 what next? J-Man, you're such a tease. Did she let you touch her biologies?
A gentleman never tells.
Oh, come on.
But a scientist explains.
Yeah.
Let me tell you a little thing about the laws of attraction. The human brain is a especially reliant on odors to make connections. So I occasionally wafted my manly aromas in her direction. I could tell she was feeling the heat by the way she was grinding her teeth.
Whoa, 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 what next? You're teasing our prickles. When's your story gonna get physical?
I knew she was infatuated, 'cause when I spoke, her pupils dilated. And that's what happens when a lady feels arousal.
Or panic?
And hers were gigantic.
Whoa, 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 what's next? Did you do a chemistry? Did you zap her body with electricity?
Ugh, no, Victor. You don't even go here.
Oh, nobody likes a substitute teacher.
Oh, it's Lucy. Hey, Lucy. Ready for our big second date tonight? What do you mean a rain check? But I thought you liked... Hello? Hello? She broke up with me.
Oh, that's too bad.
Shut up, Victor. I can't believe this. Why do nice guys never get the girls?
Girls like bad boys, maybe you're kind of a square.
Shut up, Victor. Oh, maybe you're right. God, girls are so shallow. I try so hard to be nice and no one appreciates it. I bet if she knew I had a dark side, she'd really like me. You want a bad boy, Lanyon? I'll show you a bad boy. I'll figure out a way to unleash the monster inside. Then she'll go out with me, 'cause I'm bad. Who's bad? That's me. You got it. Ooh, I'm bad. Who's bad? I'm really bad. Yeah, I'm really, really bad. Oh, fucking hell.
My name's Laurence Owen. I'm the composer and performer and co-creator of Jekyll Versus Hyde.
And I'm Lindsay, and I suppose I wrote the book. That's the proper terminology.
Yeah,
is
I
it?
think so, yeah.
And that's it.
But you
No,
are
I
also the performer.
Yeah, I also perform in it.
You have
Sorry.
a significant role.
yes,
Or
sorry.
several.
You've somehow edited that out of your head.
Yeah, it's because I got distracted by a jug of water. I'm very easily distracted.
So that's Laurence Owen and Lindsay Sharman. So
Yes.
people can find you online. That's the also
Yeah.
important thing. Now, we're talking about Jekyll Versus Hyde, which is your latest Edinburgh show. Although it's not a sequel, it is, if you like, the successor show to your fantastic Time Machine of a couple of years ago. It's fantastic, it is great, but it has that much, if I may say, I think it has an extra level of sophistication that your previous shows perhaps didn't.
Oh, good.
Oh,
I
wow.
thought you were going to say, but
But-
it
no,
was
it's a
a
good-
little bit
No,
stupid.
it's an enormous bit stupid, but it's lovely. But
In the
it's
best
also
possible.
incredibly clever. It's that wonderful mixture of being absurd and intricate and clever. Because you could, at one level, read it, and I did, as a gloss on the theory of duality, which of course is at the very core of Jekyll and Hyde. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Tell me, how did we get to where we are today? How did Jekyll and Hyde appear in your lives?
Yeah.
Well,
And were you the parents or the godparents?
Well, I was actually, I do a bit of one-on-one tutoring, and I was actually teaching it. And I was also looking for something that was short enough to adapt for the Edinburgh Fringe, because obviously an hour can't be too long, can't do War and Peace or anything, although we could, maybe we could.
Maybe we should.
Maybe that's next time.
War but no peace.
Exactly what you said, actually. The duality thing hit me as a nice thing for a husband and wife team to explore throughout through the story itself.
Yeah, and in fact, interestingly, I didn't quite sort of envisage the show properly until you sort of did a synopsis for me.
Yeah.
You wrote out a kind of breakdown of it after we'd been discussing it for ages, and then suddenly the whole concept all just sort of clicked in my head at once, and I went, oh, I see. It's like two different shows happening at the same time, and they're fighting between each other, and like that being a parallel of the story itself.
Yeah, and a parallel also represents who the characters themselves are as well. So Strange Case is the embodiment of the character Laurence, and Hyde-ing is the embodiment of the character Lindsay.
Yeah.
Yeah, were there any... Oh yes, and also I wanted to talk about the idea of sort of schlock rock or popular musicals versus a sort of more a serious theatre with songs.
Yes.
Chamber musicals.
Yes, exactly, yes. Yeah.
Briefly then, because we've alluded to it, do one or both of you, this will be interesting, perhaps want to briefly explain what the show is, what we've just seen? I mean, I think you've touched on it there, but...
It's essentially two performers at the same time attempting to perform very different musical versions of the story of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, the serious one, although the serious one has elements of ludicrousness as well. So the show starts with the serious one, And then the chaotic element, which is the stagehand, introduces the other musical and sort of so derails this serious musical.
Yeah, and it's a constant back and forth, and we keep switching between the two different shows, the very, very serious chamber musical, if you like, a kind of Sondheim-esque, very high art, high theatre one.
With sock puppets.
With sock puppets.
Sock puppets, but Gilbertian patter. Now that's a
it's
a great combo, that.
I suspected you would probably touch on the influence on that song.
I can't help it, but watching non-articulate socks singing an articulate song is a very interesting.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, we didn't want either musical to be too good, as it were, which is why we introduced the sock puppets for the first thing, because we didn't want people to be like, oh, I was really getting into that excellent serious musical.
Yeah.
And you know, to be annoyed at the Lindsay character for interrupting it. So introducing sock puppets is kind of going to the audience, this is a bit crap, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's hope something stops
We
it.
hope it's almost like a signpost to saying people, don't worry, it's not just this for an hour.
Well, I think that happens the moment that the black cloth behind which you're performing, Laurence, when you're doing the sock puppets, is placed over your head because Lindsay's off doing something else, I think, preparing tea as a bit part.
Yeah.
Before we get on to the duality, which I think is going to be the substance of that conversation, I would just like to say I love the way you feed, because it's a great novel, and I've had the privilege of reading it, because I once also adapted it for pantomime. So
did you?
Yes, I feel your pain and your love.
Oh.
I wouldn't possibly comment, but yours is infinitely better, I should say. But I like the fact that you, without over-egging it, you also pick up on the flaws, if I may be able to say that, in Stevenson's novel, because it's always had the weakness of not really having any female characters worth mentioning, and no one stays around for more than a page.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I remember it was evil housekeeper, referenced child, and histrionic maid who spots the murder of Sir Danvers Carew from a window.
Yeah. That's right.
Basically, the police said, well, but you're a histrionic maid. Yes,
Yeah.
I am, sir.
Yeah.
Well, I won't be listening to anything you say. Be upon your business.
Yeah, that's typical in novels of that era, though, isn't it? Everything is reported.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to see any actual exciting things happening. You can only hear people going, goodness me, something rather unpleasant has happened.
And it's all men in drawing rooms, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I love the fact you reference that. You know, you do say so much of this is reported. The mystery element, of course, is no longer relevant after X number of years. And then there are other sort of beautiful references just fed in, because the, if you like, the meta story of the relationship between the two of you as husband and wife performers on the stage goes through its ups and downs through the piece. And you even reference the fact that you had written Strange Case to be the antidote to Hyde-ing. And the word antidote, of course, is not an unweighted word in the world of Jekyll and Hyde. So all these lovely little golden threads, I think. I think that's why it's one of the reasons it's such a beautiful tapestry.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on all of that, because there's that fine line between sort of shouting it in people's faces and making it as look, it's a bit of thematic do-wobbies.
Pay attention now.
Yeah, and then making it a bit too subtle. And you don't want to do that. You want people to pick up on it.
Well, actually, what I'd like to say I spotted it because I'm very clever, but the reality is I spotted it because you two are very clever. And that is the actual reality of it, because it's there if you want it, but it absolutely doesn't matter if you don't get that. And once again, you know, really what I'm doing here is just picking up little bits and pieces, because there's so much going on as well. There's sort of no dead time. Even a little throwaway, I think, where Lindsay, you're on the maracas during an instrumental
solo break moment.
Exactly, which means people who want the solo break can have that, but there's also there's something going on in the sidelines.
We didn't want either of us to sort of ever not be doing something at all times.
Well, that's the weird thing about Edinburgh as well, though. You can never quite exit the stage.
No.
So you've got to find a way. Well, apart from the one time I did actually exit the stage and stand at the bar, but you can't do that too much. You can't. There are no wings. So you've got to think about what each character's doing at any one time.
You are dependent on your venue a bit, aren't you? And we did write this show with our venue, which is the Voodoo Room Speakeasy, which is a very, very intimate, nice little venue, but it doesn't have any wings or storage or any way of escaping the stage, basically.
We're all in together. They're all the same performers.
Yes,
we know
absolutely.
it very well now, because we've done 4 shows
This
here.
is the 4th one, yes.
Yeah. So we can actually think about that while we're writing, which is a huge relief, actually, because before we had a venue that we kept coming back to, it was always like, is this going to work?
What's going to happen? What will there be?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like the Jermyn Street Theatre in London, the loos on the stage. You cannot go during a performance.
Right.
There's a lot of people very desperate for the intervals. So
that's
and not always
insane.
because of the quality of the show. Let's just briefly talk timelines then, if we may. So you came across Jekyll and Hyde in your professional life, your other professional life.
Yes.
When was this approximately? Do you always have an idea on when your next show's coming?
Well, we were going to do something last year, but we just ran out of time, really, because you've got to submit your idea by
After doing the time machine?
Yeah, I know. What a basic flaw that was.
If only we could have used it to go back in time. But yeah, you've got to decide what you're doing by November.
Yes.
So you come back from the Fringe in September. You haven't really got very long.
Yeah, you lie down for a bit as well.
Yeah.
We just nothing was sort of really occurred to us. So we took a year off, and then we sort of had the idea for this show pretty much during a visit to the Edinburgh Fringe in 2018, where we just were
as punters.
Yes, exactly, where we were just watching things, and then we wrote it very quickly in January, basically, this year, and then we did a very, very early preview in January, and that kind of got most of it done.
Yeah,
but
and then we tweaked it, took out the shit a bit.
Yes, we
hopefully
refined it.
added new shit bits.
Buffed.
Buffed.
Yes.
Buffed the two.
Yes, of course.
So I'm going to ask you a stupid question. It was obviously written with that duality in place. You didn't actually go off and write a Strange Case and a Hyde-ing and then work out the best bits. Or are there bits of both those shows, I mean, not in completeness, but are there other bits of Strange Case and other bits of Hyde-ing still in your drawers? To quote the,
well, I have a big whiteboard, so I had Lindsay and Laurence's narrative, and then the actual Jekyll and Hyde narrative, and then Hyde-ing narrative.
We sort of decided with that which musical was going to represent which part of the story.
Yeah.
And we wanted it to feel very even-handed. We wanted it to. We didn't want one to be sort of weighted against the other. So you get, I hope, enough of both shows.
Yes, it's not one with the flavour of the other. It is a fair dollop of both. To use the
Yeah, and then of course combining at the end into this prog rock
Yes.
thing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, speech marks. If there is a moral, it is that.
Yes.
The best of both can make something better, isn't it?
Yes.
Which obviously is displayed both in the narrative and in the speech marks real life going on stage.
Yeah, it's quite a sort of basic moral in a way. Sort
Yeah.
of cooperation,
Yeah.
kids.
Who knew that working together might actually be a good thing?
Yeah. It's like that schism though, because in the book Jekyll is presenting a respectable face and but longs for his wild youth and everything. It's the idea that as well you should honestly embrace both elements and present them to the world.
Yeah.
I think that was it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair summation. Yeah.
You cannot just be the gentle veneer of respectability.
No.
Yeah.
Beneath lurks the woodwork.
Yes,
Yeah.
If
exactly.
you're a table, that is.
Yeah.
Because the book's all about repression, isn't it? And so the character Laurence is very repressed.
Well, I was going to ask how you developed, how quickly you established who was going to be who.
Oh, I think very quickly.
Yeah.
Well, you basically said, well, I'm more of a Hyde, and me, Laurence, I am more of a Jekyll.
Yeah, but also it has to go with our skill sets as well. So Laurence is a musician and a singer, and I am not. So I knew we had to give most of the songs to Laurence, and so it made sense that he was steering the ship. So he had to be Jekyll, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Hyde, being an agent of chaos, doesn't necessarily need to be able to sing.
A tap dance behind a black curtain goes a very long way.
Yes.
There's a lot of enjoyment today, I thought.
Yeah, that was fun. I always enjoy
Make me
that.
fit as well.
But does that face you with any difficulties? Because the problem with the Laurence we see on stage is he's quite highfalutin, he's quite a purist, and therefore not absolutely 100% always likeable. And historically, you've always been on stage a very likeable character.
Well, that's very nice of you to say.
Well, I've always liked it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we did try and write it in such a way that neither of us were sort of particularly more likeable than the other.
Yeah.
We each have flaws.
Yeah. I was very aware of not making Jekyll too unlikable. So, I think I countered that by making Hyde equally unlikable.
Well, what I like about your Hyde is there's that mixture of sort of your character has truculence, and certainly at the beginning when you're, forgive me, the techie who's just playing Mrs. Twiglet, and also the absurdity, which of course sweetens any kind of. But also, I mean, this actually comes back to the duality thing. But actually, it's not a simple thing that one of you is the bad one and one of you is the good one in your Laurence and Lindsay persona. You've both got a bit of that because. As Lindsay, you're disruptive to get what you want, but it's also established that when the putative Hyde-ing musical didn't make it to Broadway, you were able to shrug it off better. You know, you had the better karma, as it were.
Yeah.
Whereas Laurence, obviously, you had the respect that comes with the sort of the upright decency character, but also you've been neglecting your wife in the figurative world we're in here.
Yes.
I should say it's a perfectly lovely, happy marriage. It is. You know, listeners there sitting next to each other, but,
hissing like feral cats.
like illegal ferrets.
Yeah.
But so there is that duality within the two of you as well, which is, you know, so it's not a simple, oh look, it's Jekyll and Hyde being projected onto these two characters. It's Jekyll and Hyde being projected into each of these two characters, and I think that's an important distinction.
Well, if you have a protagonist and an antagonist, the antagonist has got to lose, and we couldn't just have the marriage breaking up.
No, that would be a tragedy.
Quite a dark comedy this year.
Yeah, where you vanquish your wife on stage.
Yes.
So yeah, and also, it stems also from conversations that we'd had as well. Like we've talked quite a lot about popular music and how it can have artistry and all the rest of it. And the idea, and you in your career, Laurence, you tap into all different genres, don't you?
I do, yes.
And so I wanted to represent that on stage.
Musical polymath.
Yeah. And so part of it was showcasing what you could do, and in order to do that, you kind of have to have a character that can do everything.
There's also some things that have arrived as a result of actual real conversations that we've had, such as my reluctance to play the guitar, for instance. For some reason, I've had this idea in my. I'm kind of working through it now. I think I'm over it now. For some reason, for many years, I had this idea that, oh no, I don't want to put guitar solos and things into this show.
I'm always the one going, put guitar solo.
Yeah, even though I can play the guitar to a reasonably high level,
you certainly can, yes.
but it just, I always sort of thought, oh no, it's a bit showy offy. I think.
Oh no, but as Joe blogs on the street, me, as someone who's not very musical, I know how I feel when I watch someone do a guitar solo on stage. And I was like, you need to give people that.
So certain elements of that story, with me being sort of coaxed out of thinking that something is an arrogant, showy, offy thing to do.
Yeah.
And then what was it? So I will not lower myself to such self-indulgent and gratuitous behaviour.
Yeah, because I remember you saying it was self-indulgent, but I think that's because you hang out with other musicians a lot. So obviously doing that kind of thing would be showing off to another musician.
I guess so.
But doing it to us...
We the punters.
Yes, we the punters love it. So yeah, I made you give Yoda a guitar solo about 4 years ago.
Oh yeah, that's true, yes, yeah.
In Cine Musical.
Oh, I remember. Yeah. I must also say that you hoodwinked me, because it's under a black cloth at the beginning, the guitar. And I was betting money when I've seen the show twice. It's one of the few shows I've seen twice this year. And the first time I was with a particular friend, and I said to him, "That's going to be their theremin."
Oh,
because I knew you bought and learnt the theremin for the last show.
Yeah.
Oh, I
they're
see.
going to bring that out again, and you didn't. You rotters.
Oh.
The theremin was tricky though. That often went a bit wrong just before the show.
The theremin was one of the hardest tech elements to get right every day, because they're so temperamental.
To play or just
to even set up, because they I don't know, they seem to be dependent on whether the moon is aligned with Saturn or something, whether they'll work properly.
Your first astrological instrument.
They're very odd, and so very often you'd plug it in and it would be totally different to how it was the last time I plugged it in, and because it's so simple, it's just a box with a couple of circuit boards in, there's nothing to it, but conversely it's kind of got no security features within it at all. So I'm not sad to see the back of the theremin for a while.
Yeah, when you got a tight turnaround time and you got to get another show up, you don't want to have to.
The guitar is a bit more meat and potatoes. You just plug it in and it works.
Yeah, put it in a case, walk away.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. Now, what have the audience told you? Because I saw it on one of your earliest performances here in Edinburgh, but you've also been in London, and as you said, since January it's been doing some kind of performances, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You're at Wilton's Music Hall, I know.
We haven't performed it at Wilton's Music Hall, but we were given a.
Fringe Award.
Yes, we won a little award from Wilton's, where they
Fantastic.
supplied us with a rehearsal room for 2 weeks, and we workshopped it there, and they're kind of, in whatever way they can, giving us a bit of a hand.
You did the Comedy Museum as well, though, I think, didn't you?
We did do the Museum of Comedy, yes, that's right, yeah.
So you've done it in different places, and we're now essentially a week into the festival Fringe here.
Yes.
Audience is different every day? Are you getting... I always want to know what... Because audiences are they're that third component, aren't they? There's the two of you and then the audience, and they will make it different for you every night.
Yeah, definitely.
They have generally been very, very nice, very, very receptive.
This is the most fun show we've done for us.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, we are enjoying this show more than.
Why is that?
I think partly because we're both fully in it. That's nice.
Yeah.
I think it's just always more fun to do a show with another person if you can, because there's just so much more potential for bouncing stuff.
Yeah,
It's
that's
bouncy
it.
offiness, which
Yeah.
I lose the official
Yeah.
noun you're looking
Bouncy offiness, yeah.
Yeah, being on your own, because we've both done solo shows, and it's keeping that momentum going. It's tough. So you really got to crank it out after the first week of Edinburgh. But actually, when there's someone else on stage, I don't know, some sort of energy exchange goes on.
And I don't know, maybe it's
for.
because...
Duality and mutuality.
Oh, yeah,
This is
yeah.
suddenly turning into a Jane Austen novel.
Yeah. I think maybe as well because we are constantly changing between two very different moods, and I can never decide whether I want to do comedy shows or serious shows. So within the same show, you've actually got both, and that is very enjoyable as
It's
a performer.
very fringe, this show, as well.
It is.
You know, and we got stupid props and Owen and meta elements and all the rest. And those two things, you don't tend to see them in theatre outside of the Fringe, I don't think.
Yeah.
And it's really nice doing a super fringy show at the Fringe.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean,
Please for it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we hope it will have life after this Fringe, but
deserves to.
well, that's very kind of you to say. But in a way, it is perfectly crafted for the Edinburgh Fringe. This show.
Yeah, whereas I think Time Machine could travel a bit more. So we did talk.
I like what you did.
We need to stop setting up these
in 4 dimensions.
ludicrous clunking cliches.
Yeah. But we did take that around the country, didn't we? And I feel like it was a bit more straightforward theatre, whereas this is a lot sillier.
It sort of sells itself, the Time Machine, doesn't it? Because it's a known commodity.
Well, it was a very straight adaptation in a way. The Time Machine.
Yeah.
Obviously, it had another.
Lovely injections of comedy into it, but the storytelling part.
The story
Yeah.
was perfectly intact.
I think people love time travel. I think it's a real selling point. I think it was easier to get audiences along to that than to Jekyll and Hyde, potentially.
yeah.
I mean, we're doing fine with the audiences, but Time Machine, we were turning people away, weren't
Yeah, every day it was hard to get people in. Yeah.
we? Yeah.
It was
So
cool.
so that's an interesting lesson to take away. Now all of our future shows, time
Yeah.
travel.
Do you think that's got anything to do with the fact that, as you make the observation in the show, there are 3 versions of Jekyll and Hyde in all their different forms up here in Edinburgh, including one that's on at the same time as you. And of course, Robert Louis Stevenson is a son of Edinburgh, and Deacon Brodie, the sort of the archetype for Jekyll and Hyde, has got a pub and live round here. And, could it just be that, particularly locally, because a lot of Edinburgh residents come to
Well,
the
they've had
Fringe.
enough.
Yeah, I think maybe that's enough Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
Wow, I wish someone had told us that before we made the bloody show.
Jekyll and Hyde of High Wycombe, more exotic.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe.
time travel. There was another time travel up when we did that, but that was a very straight play, and ours was a musical.
Another time machine, that is, yeah.
Time Machine, sorry. Jekyll and Hyde. There is another musical, literally on at the same time
It's
as
the
this.
Frank Wildhorn one, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's another comedy, so not a musical, but there's another comedy version. So they are, probably
It's
splitting
well
the audience a bit.
represented, yeah. So it's possible. It's
Yeah.
possible. And maybe if they're not audiences are not familiar with our work, they might choose to go to a straighter adaptation rather than a comedy take on something.
Well, I think there's a word for that. Fools. What have you had to cut?
What have we had to cut?
There's always more material than meets the stage, isn't there?
Every song was a bit longer,
Oh, was it?
I think.
Yeah,
Too many guitar solos.
Yeah, 2 minutes, just so many, just every song, 8-minute guitar solos. Really self-indulgent
And
and
very
gratuitous.
difficult with the glove puppets.
Yeah. No, I think every single one we cut sort of about 30 seconds to a minute off.
And the argument was difficult. We kept changing the big
Yeah.
climactic argument between us. I
Yeah.
can't remember now. There's so many versions
Yeah.
in my head.
Even the album that we're selling after the show is slightly different. Yes.
Yeah, because we got to record that. We didn't want to. We tried to leave the recording off as long as possible so that the script was pretty much done.
Yeah.
But even after that, I was like, no, I'm sorry, we're going to have to change.
And there's no point doing 2 weeks of rehearsal if you're just going to go, well, that's
yeah,
how it
can't
is
change
now,
it. Yeah,
can't
yeah.
do anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't
and that
remember.
will make a dead show. I mean, if
Yeah.
it comes inert, then
Yeah.
what's the fun? Where actually it is the bounce and still the organic element.
Yeah.
It takes us back to the audience. So
Yeah.
they will find things funny you didn't know were funny, perhaps, and vice versa.
And we are
Yeah.
still adding bits and bobs and changing things very slightly, which is making it a bit of a nightmare for our tech Ben here, who's having to adapt cue lines as he goes.
Yeah.
But essentially, the script is now, I think, pretty much finalised.
Yeah.
But the business may still continue.
Yeah, we keep finding new gags.
Yeah, what's the last one we found?
Well, the moment where I sort of tear off my shirt very slightly when I'm doing a serious soliloquy of a song to make it myself look like even more of an egomaniac.
It
That
does
we
have
discovered.
that Heathcliff feel.
Well,
to it.
yes,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's this huge white Victorian shirt that looks like a kind of Les Mis sort of
Oh,
cliche.
and what I eat right at the beginning, that changed. Like the first time I ever did it, I tried quavers and they dried out my entire mouth. I was practically choking on them for the first half. So
we
I was
had
like,
to
right,
pause the
no
show.
Crisps. Yeah, while I went, water.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then we changed it to sweets and then we changed it to a bit of backwards and forwards between me and Tech Ben. Because otherwise it's just me on my own, just with the mic, the position of the mic as well. I'm trying to rustle the sweets into the mic, and that can be quite difficult. So it's easier for me and Tech Ben to have a conversation. That's her name now, Tech Ben.
Tech Ben.
Have you considered making your interruption through Coca-Cola and Mentos? Bearing in mind you reference them later? Or?
The Coke's there.
Yeah.
But not the Mentos is such a ridiculous prop.
I think
Jumbo Mentos.
I think the Mentos is a moment.
Actually, that was quite a
later.
late joke because originally Jekyll just stabs himself, and then I was like, "Hang on, you mentioned Coke and Mentos in that song.
There's another
what
gag
a
to be
brilliantly
found."
stupid way to die."
Yeah,
So that changed in about the last week before we came here. I think.
yeah,
It's
very
a better
recent.
ending, though, if you don't mind me saying.
I think so.
yeah.
I think it's just got a bit more punch.
Yeah.
Especially for a show that's meant to be the sort of hybrid of the total silly one and the more serious one.
Also, in the book, he does poison himself. So Mentos and Coke, in a way.
It's a kind of
The
poison.
doctor's right.
Yes.
Dr. Jekyll writes, anyway. So, where next for Jekyll and Hyde?
That's a very good question at this stage.
Oh, Jekyll versus Hyde.
Jekyll
so
versus
let's get it
Hyde.
right.
Yes, Jekyll versus Hyde. It's called.
We don't really know, do we? We don't have a producer, so we might write to a few places to try and get them to. Well, some people are coming who we are trying to, chat up.
Yes.
Some venues are coming to see it.
We did take our last show to Wilton's Music Hall, which was very nice. We'd like to take it back there.
Yeah. So she's coming to see the show soon.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, that depends if it fits.
If it's
with
there.
what they want.
Yeah. But we hope we might be able to tour it a little bit, and we are starting to formulate a new idea as well.
It's like you know what I was going to ask.
Well, we're quite into turnover. We quite don't like to hang around on one thing too long.
Yeah.
And you know your timetabling. I mean, as we, this is where we came in.
Yeah.
In the sense that it has to be done by November.
Yeah.
In a real sense.
At
Otherwise,
least
run away.
the concept of it needs to be complete by November. Yeah.
And the hook.
Yes. Of course, more
It's
than
very
anything else.
important. That.
I won't hold you to anything, but is there any sort of gothic-y or
Yes.
Victorian again?
Yeah,
I
well-
sort of detect a kind of area that you like to wallow in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wallow not being the right word, but explore.
Yeah.
Well,
to mudlark.
So we're going for a thriller this time, but
Yeah.
a sort of gothic-y thriller.
Maybe
set
we
in a theme park with I might as well say
You
it.
might as well said it.
Oh, well,
So-
don't if you don't want to.
No, that's all right. So we actually have a podcast where we incessantly talk about Disney.
That is true. Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, which is only for hardcore Disney fans really, because otherwise it's very tedious. But
Must tell us what that is, though.
Well, it's called Adults Do Disney.
yeah,
Very
And
good.
it speaks for itself, I hope.
yeah, and it's a lot of us doing fake Imagineering and stuff. So
Yeah.
we're going to take our obsession with theme parks and turn it into a sort of a creepy thriller set in a musical, obviously set in a theme park.
Yeah. That's kind of all we will say at this time.
That's fine.
But yeah.
I'll tell you what I've got. There's a classic, and I do use the word advisedly, a Scooby-Doo episode.
Oh yeah,
So
right.
with Charlie and the Robot in a haunted playground.
Yeah.
It probably will have that feel.
I mean, I think Scooby-Doo is the horror reference point that we can all
Yeah.
get behind, right?
Well, they were also
And
aiming
it's
for a
50
bit
years
of.
this year, by the way. didn't
Oh,
you?
is it?
It's golden anniversary of Scooby-Doo,
Good old
2019.
Oh, what, this year or next year?
No, this year.
I've
but,
missed it.
Oh, that's
damn.
a shame.
Yeah, but there's a feature film coming out to mark it between now and then. So,
Okay.
Oh, right.
Just
Oh,
different.
interesting. Because we were also thinking a sort of atmosphere of Twin Peaks, but maybe Scooby-Doo's more, more up
Twin
in
Peaks, Scooby-Doo,
ballpark.
hybrid. Yeah, I think probably if we attempted Twin Peaks, we'd end up with Scooby-Doo. Yeah, that's probably what would happen.
our... Yeah. A sort of slightly perverted Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
So good. So there is a real chance to see Jekyll Versus Hyde in the future, we hope.
I expect so.
And the best way of staying in touch so people can find out where it might be is your websites?
Yes, well, we now have a joint website which we're using, which is LOLS Productions. That's LOLS.
Because that's Laurence, Owen, and Lindsay Sharman.
Is amazingly our initials.
Because
It works well, doesn't
we're
it?
a Laurel.
We were a little bit. We did debate that for a while. We did think, is this a stupid name?
Does this make us sound like
LOLS
14-year-olds?
Productions? Come for the LOLs. But
then
we decided to do it anyway because that's the sort of people that we
Because you are cute.
are. Yeah.
and we are 14 years old.
Yeah.
In our head.
It's all dimples.
At heart. But yes, if you go to lolsproductions.co.uk, that will have news and updates as they come.
And your music's all available everywhere,
Oh yes,
isn't it?
my sort of serious in inverted commas website is lawrenceowen.co.uk as well. If you're interested in that.
And we have plenty of CDs and download cards if anyone wants to get in touch.
That's true. Yes,
And those are available from the website.
they will be. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I can recommend it because it absolutely is a 5-star show. This is a cast iron hit. In
Thank
my
you.
view.
Yeah, brilliant.
And because it is the perfect mix of seriousness, absurdity, and the cleverness between the two. So it just starts and finishes, and it finishes too soon. And that's a sign of a good show.
Oh, what a brilliant review.
This is wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So I look forward to seeing your next production. I mean, I spend the rest of the year wondering, I wonder what they're doing.
Well, we might have a tie-in podcast, so a narrative podcast to the show that we're going to bring next year as well. So,
That's true.
yeah,
Yes.
so you might get to hear about it.
There may be more tales from the theme park, whatever that turns out to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I genuinely can't wait.
I can't wait.
Yeah, and the moment we finish, I'm going to find your podcast as well.
Oh yeah.
That might be a disappointment.
Don't say that. Well, seriously, Lindsay, Laurence, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing the sharp, and I genuinely look forward to speaking to you again.
Yeah,
Always a
lovely. Well,
pleasure.
thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Musical talk. Well, Mike, here we are again to talk about yet more shows we saw at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2019. All of the shows we talk about are shows which I've either enjoyed tremendously or have enjoyed some aspects of.
There's been a really wide variety of shows, both in subject matter and, of course, in quality as well this year. But I've been really pleased overall, and of course, it's always fun to get together and kibitz about what we've seen.
A word I don't actually know, but I'm sure I agree with it.
Always happy to expand your vocabulary.
What was it again?
Kibitz,
And what does it mean?
sort of chit chat.
Oh, right, really? Do you know, I genuinely haven't come across that.
I'll double check to make sure that's true, and if it's not, we'll edit this out. So if you're hearing this, it turned out that was true.
Everything you say is gospel as far as I'm concerned. But I think today we're going to talk about a show that we both admired very much by someone or some people that we admire very much, and that's Laurence Owen and his wife Lindsay Sharman, who in recent years have been working together to put on shows. They did a very excellent Time Machine a couple of years ago, but have surpassed themselves, I think, this year with Jekyll Versus Hyde, which takes the Jekyll and Hyde material and... well, it is exactly as they say. It is, as we know, there is a duality in the Jekyll and Hyde story anyway. I don't think I'm breaching any spoilers here after 100-odd years, but in this case, we start with Laurence Owen on stage trying to tell us a very serious reworking of the Jekyll and Hyde story called Strange Case, which is a kind of little chamber musical version of it. Although, obviously, because Laurence and Lindsay are both very funny people, even this serious telling is done through, at least at the beginning, through sock puppets. The two gentlemen in their Victorian living room relating the story of Jekyll and Hyde and the setup exactly as it is in the book. Lindsay is supposed to be the technician on the stage. She's also playing Mrs. Twiglet, the much put upon housekeeper whose only role is to go off and collect cakes for the two sock puppets who are telling the story. She eventually rebels and says this is boring, and then goes on to say, but we've already written a much more lively, possibly raucous, vulgar and, dare I say it, commercial version for the brasher end of the West End and Broadway stage called Hyde-ing, and then we proceed to get a few songs from that, and it is both highly entertaining and terrible in its own different way. And then, of course, the rest of the piece is essentially an argument between the two actors on stage representing the two aspects of the musical, and then finding a middle way in the end, as it turns out, to tell the story in a way that works successfully whilst resolving their internal partnership relationship issues on the stage. But what you're actually getting, of course, is a tremendously clever gloss on the nature of duality and the Jekyll and Hyde, the good and the bad, stemming from the same source, both in source material and in person.
And yet I would argue...
Playing out on stage. Marvellous, I think.
Sorry, I didn't mean to trot on you just there. But having done so, I will say that I also think that the show, if we were to ask ourselves, what is the show about? It's actually a show about parity and collaboration, creatively. Because the depiction of these two different contradictory versions of Jekyll and Hyde and the humorous juxtaposition of the two and the alternating back and forth, that's almost the battleground for recognition between the heightened quasi-fictionalized version of Lindsay and quasi-fictionalized version of Laurence. At the start of the show, when Laurence is introducing, what was it?
Strange Case.
He comes across both as a caricature of himself, but along a very specific axis. He's very full of himself as an author. And I think he says, music by I, Laurence Owen. Lyrics by I, Laurence Owen.
He does indeed.
And that's very funny, but it also sets up this tale of somebody who's very much sees himself as a solo artist when he's not. He has a collaborator. And obviously in real life, I don't expect there is this kind of contentiousness, but in the fictionalized version of the two of them, he is very much sweeping his partner, both domestic partner and creative partner, under the rug and giving her a bit part. And initially Lindsay protests as the character, in the voice of the character, saying, this is a dumb role, I'm not getting enough to do. And eventually she steps out of the character, and then the meta discussion begins about which version of Jekyll and Hyde they should do. And at the end of it all, they find a kind of collaborative equilibrium between the two of them. And I think that's the actual nugget of real message that is smuggled in this enjoyable, zany ride through dysfunctional personalities and ill-fated adaptations.
That is a very interesting extra parallel, and I agree with you, and I think I was absorbing that without necessarily clocking it overtly. I think I was, as always, taking the ridiculously pompous, overly intellectual approach of congratulating myself on having spotted the duality essay. But you're quite right, it is about a collaborative relationship in both senses of the word. I will just say that it also sits, or stands, I should say, head and shoulders above other representations of that particular problem. Now, I must say, having gone to the Fringe now for well over a decade, I have sat through more than my fair share of shows where people are not sufficiently comfortable with their material, but they feel they need to add an extra level, or the subplot is often an argument in real life, as it were, between the performers of a piece instead of any of the characters in the piece. I've even seen it in a Gilbert and Sullivan concert, which some very accomplished American singers put on a few years ago, but then completely ruined by concocting a kind of mock faux rivalry between the principal tenor and the principal soprano. As a failed relationship was alleged to have occurred, and now they were singing reluctantly with each other. And I've seen variants on that so often as a way of spicing up an otherwise unconvincing narrative, to use Gilbert. But in this case, it was built in deliberately. And therefore, what it didn't feel like was an adjunct. It didn't feel like, oh no, this doesn't quite work, let's A, send it up, or B, add this kind of exoskeleton subplot, and be meta about it as well, because that's very fashionable. It was built this way. It was designed for this relationship to be the central relationship in the story, more so than the Jekyll and Hyde story. And as a result, I think was seamless in the way that it executed that back and forth between the telling of the Jekyll and Hyde story through two variant different ways of doing it, and the Lindsay and Laurence story. So what it felt like to me was a fully integrated, seamless production and performance, or performances, and not just a bolt-on.
One thing I like about chatting with you is hearing my own opinion expressed far more eloquently than ever I could do myself.
You're very flattering, but possibly also 3 times longer than you could do yourself.
Well, if that's the price for eloquence, I'm willing to pay it.
You're civil and marvellous, thank you. But it was a masterpiece of performance as well, as well writing, I think.
What I've noticed, if I can extrapolate on the basis of 2 examples, this and The Time Machine, is that because it is a performer-authored show, there is just a really tight bond between the performance details and the story itself. It does not feel, as is often the case, that there was a story and then some actors improv'd a lot of stuff on top of the story. It really feels like it's designed from the get-go to take advantage of the 2 particular people performing the piece. And when that happens, you may limit a show to a particular set of performers, but what you get is a kind of idiomatic flow between all the details of the performance and what's going on story-wise. And it's a real joy because they are such polished comedians both in their own right, but also as they play off of one another.
They also know how to cast themselves in the right roles for themselves as well. I mean, Laurence sings beautifully, and it is observed that Lindsay can sing but not so well, and I think she'll be the first to admit that, and therefore she is given the coarser role of Mr. Hyde in the performance piece, allegedly reluctantly at the beginning by Laurence, but actually it's a perfect fit in that sense. But she's also got a slightly, he can play up to the intellectual but pompous performer, intellectual but pompous comedian. She plays up to the coarser, more raucous comedian. But they've cast themselves in the right roles for the piece. Or they're both brilliant in all things and they've just happened to have cast themselves that way. But I do very much like the fact that everything fits like a glove, which incidentally is what a glove puppet does at the beginning. But
this is a piece of which there's less to summarize. It's much more you have to go out and experience and have a great timepiece. But I continue to be
watch it, which is a timepiece.
Yes. Oh, puns on puns. We're so sorry, audience, but we're delirious with fatigue at this point. One thing I'll point out is that Laurence has a lot of sheer talent. He can jump between different character types, and they all feel very well embodied, and they don't sound like the same voice. Honestly, they're so distinct from each other. He can apparently play a mean guitar solo. And the piece overall, what I love is that it has the quality of being both highbrow and lowbrow at the same time.
Isn't that good? That really it shows their range as well as their writing. I think the point you've made there is actually very well illustrated by the first two songs as I remember them. The first song is a long expository song in the Gilbertian patter mould between the two sock puppets. So the two characters, two Victorian gentlemen in a drawing room eating their cake from Mrs. Twiglet, discussing what's gone wrong with Dr. Jekyll and how he's fallen in with this terrible, terrible Mr. Hyde, but who is Mr. Hyde? And it's done in this, as I say, in a Gilbertian patter song, which feels deeply appropriate for this sort of late Victorian telling of a strange case. And then the very next song is exhumed, I think, from Hyde-ing, and I think it's called Whoa, Whoa, Whoa. And it's a kind of high school American thing, and I'm doing the accent terribly, but he's a teacher in this American high school, and he does the kind of introductory song. Here are my mates on the faculty at the university, and we all fancy this teacher, to show you how sort of what a part of my language bastard version it is. That Dr. Frankenstein is there. He's one of the teachers as well, who, funny enough, will have a role to play at the very end of the piece when it is finally resolved. But those two songs come one after the other. There's a gap in between, but they are playing to very different kinds of strengths. And you do leap from 19th century music to what I would call 20th century, late 20th century music. I'm using very broad brush terms here. But seamlessly, you get different characters. You get very British, you get very American, you get very reserved and downplayed, you get very over-the-top grotesques, all on the turn of a sixpence, it seems to me.
It is almost like a two-person variety show,
yes,
though very coherent and integrated at the same time.
There is a wealth of joy to be had from Jekyll Versus Hyde, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it is a show to be seen, or at least to be heard, because it is available on CD, by the way, and download. But our description can only be gushing in the end because we both thought it was fantastic.
Agreed. If any of you listening have an opportunity to see this Edinburgh-wise or otherwise, we highly encourage it. It's just a blast.
It really is, and I want to see what they bring next time. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. In this 10-point review, I'm going to be talking about the stage production of 42nd Street. And I'm talking, I think, specifically about the version that was in London in 2018 and 2019 at Drury Lane. I had the pleasure of seeing it then, and I've subsequently seen the original film, 42nd Street, from 1933. And then to top it off, I watched the live recording on a live stream on the website Broadway HD of the London production of 42nd Street from Drury Lane after that. So the sequence is the musical on stage, the film from which it originates, and then the musical on stage but live streamed. And it's that latter version which I'm reviewing here today and from which these 10 points come. Now, the very first point to notice from the stage production of 42nd Street is how it completely recontextualises the original 1933 film. In that film, which was filmed during the worst parts of the Depression after 1929 and the Wall Street crash, the slump is a real point of jeopardy. The people employed by that show want that show to succeed at all costs because otherwise they are on the breadline. There is a real existential threat to each and every one of the people involved in that production. And that gives the film a real tension, I think. Now, the problem we have on the stage version is that it's been made a little bit more saccharine because although the slump is mentioned, it doesn't seem to have any actual effect on any of the people involved in the production of Pretty Lady, the name of the show that's being put on in 42nd Street. So what that means is the only real jeopardy is the failure of the show. And the worst that will happen if the show fails is that people will probably go off and find another show. Nobody seems very, very worried about being thrown out of their homes, losing their livelihoods, not having enough to eat. Money is no object for the producer, Julian Marsh, and we'll be hearing more of him in a minute. Money is no problem for Dorothy Brock. She's got a wealthy toy boy. Money's clearly no problem for Peggy, because she decides to walk out on the show and just take a train home. She's not even worried about the fare. Money problems just don't underpin the stage version. And that's a pity in a way, because it means it's saying to you that all it's really wanting to be is a spectacular. So lie back and enjoy it, rather than actually saying, do you know, there is some real jeopardy and some real drama in this. The second point is that the show is remarkably atypical when it comes to relationships. You normally expect the central couple or the central character to find love during the show. That isn't really what happens here. The only character who genuinely finds love or works out where her love lies is Dorothy Brock, who for the most part is painted as the villain. She is the one who realises that she doesn't want the toy boy and that she loves her long-time lover Pat and will in fact spend her life with him. And she has to suffer to get her ideal. Now that's quite a journey for a show's villain. I know she isn't quite the villain, and there are good psychological reasons for her acting as badly as she does, but she is, for all intents and purposes, the big bad in the show. And Peggy, well, we don't really get a relationship for her. She sort of flirts with the juvenile lead, and she sort of flirts with Julian Marsh, the director. But it doesn't amount to anything, and she certainly doesn't walk off with either of them at the end of the show. So it's a very atypical show. Which leads me on to my third point. Whose journey is it? Now, the person whose story seems to be the one we're watching is Peggy, the woman who walks off the street into the show and then is presented with the lead of the show when she herself causes an injury to Dorothy Brock, the ostensible star. Everything is handed to Peggy on a plate. She doesn't really have to struggle at all. She misses the original audition, but she still gets spotted when she's found dancing in a street with other members of the cast, so she's given her chance as a result of that. Then later on she's given a second chance once she's sacked. And then thirdly, of course, she's made the lead. That's the person who seems to be the journey it is, but there's no struggle in that at all. She does almost nothing. We have to take it as read that she's a magnificent actress and dancer and can do everything, but she doesn't struggle. So whose journey is it? I think I go back to my second point. The only person whose journey becomes clear and seems to become a better person is Dorothy Brock, the villain. It's certainly not Julian Marsh, and he's my fourth point. Julian Marsh in the film and on the stage play is not really a character. He's rather more of a catchphrase. To be honest, you can play a drinking game if you're watching the live stream, which is every time that Julian Marsh mentions his own name, which is a lot, you should take a drink of something or other. If you're on orange squash, you'll be all right if a little bloated. If you're on tequila slammers, then you might want to make sure you've got medical insurance. And he's a strange kind of theatrical genius. I mean, apart from shouting, "This is a Julian Marsh show, damn it!" every 12 minutes, he does seem to be sort of untouchable. No one ever questions him. He is absolute God on that stage. But he's an absolute ogre as well. He's a terrible man. He treats people like cattle, or meat, or resources. He certainly doesn't treat them as people. And yet he's identified by everyone as a genius. And he also seems to have the power to inspire. So they do respect him. But is he lovable? Well, I don't think he is. As I say, Peggy sort of flirts with him at the end, but we've not seen much of it beforehand. There's been a sense that he fancies her, but nothing comes of it. And of course he has mafia connections, so he's not a very nice man. There's very little to like in Julian Marsh. But then again, despite all these big terms like ogre and genius, there's very little to Julian Marsh. Once again, a very odd character. The fifth point is where the show deviates significantly from the original film. Now, in the original film, Julian Marsh realises that his show is not going well because we see a little bit of the opening number. I think it's actually called Loveland or something like that, which of course makes one think of Follies by Stephen Sondheim. So the show, in the film version, starts off as a failure and has to be reworked and reworked and reworked by Julian Marsh in order to make it something rather splendid. And the unusual structuring of the film that results from that, of course, is that once we see the bad song being cut out, then it's all hands to the pump to create new songs and new direction and performances for the finale, which means that when you watch the film, you get a song at the beginning, then a big gap without many songs at all, maybe a rehearsal here or there, and then finally a lot of songs at the very end. But the stage show doesn't do that at all. And that, I think, is probably a good choice for the stage show, as it's uncoupled itself from so much of the original film, and certainly the dynamics and the context of that original film. I think it's right to allow it to try to be the spectacular it is desperately trying to be. And it succeeds. There are numbers all the way through in the stage version, so you never get bored. However, my sixth point is, what the hell is the plot of Pretty Lady? Pretty Lady being, as I say, the show that's actually being put on by Julian Marsh at the theatre. All we get to see of it are thousands, seemingly, of scenes and songs, all of which seem to have no relation to anything else. There seems to be no continuity of characters within the piece, and as far as I can see, it doesn't appear to be actually a revue. It's not just a series of songs and sketches, it has a narrative purpose, we believe, because we meet the scriptwriters. They are the comedy second couple, if you're looking for the traditional avatars in this musical theatre piece. And they're not just writers, they're performers as well. And they're therefore in the theatre and can do writes and rewrites. So Pretty Lady appears to be a show with a very nebulous plot, with an awful lot of songs, most of which are about the pulchritudinousness of young ladies, and very little else. If you know the answer, please do tell me. Well, point 7 is what is the Achilles heel of 42nd Street, the stage musical. Well, it has to be said that the plot is flimsy. It's flimsier than the plot of Pretty Lady, which we've just established doesn't exist. The structure is very strange. The show depends on having a successful leading lady, and once Dorothy Brock is sort of made unavailable, Peggy is persuaded to take that role on more or less at the beginning of Act 2. When the entire cast and the producer and director turn up at the railway station to persuade her not to go back to the town from which she came. Fine, but that means that 80% of Act 2 is all about her learning the lines and the dances for all the spectacular dance numbers we're going to see. So essentially the plot is finished within 10 minutes of Act 2 starting. The rest is padding. It's magnificent padding, it's spectacular padding, and it's very musical and pleasing to the eye and ear padding, but padding it is. And therefore, as a throwaway comment, it is a great pity that the station in which she is persuaded to take on the show's responsibilities isn't Paddington, because that at least will give us some sense of what was to come. Now, my 8th point about 42nd Street is a charge that can be levelled against a lot of musicals when watched on a live stream. Not all, but most. And therefore it's not the fault of the show. 42nd Street is designed to be seen in a theatre, and it is a spectacular, as we've established. The problem with watching a live stream recording of that is it's impossible to get the atmosphere that you get in a theatre. It's a wonderful opportunity to see a show that you might not have had a chance to see, or to see again, but it does lack a certain something, and that certain something is the, and I quote, ineffable magic of theatre. For there is an ineffable magic of theatre. Just being in an auditorium waiting for a show to start generates an atmosphere, and if the show is any good, that atmosphere is merely amplified. Something wonderful takes place in a theatre. It is, after all, a temple to the theatrical muses. Let's get pretentious for a while, or in my case, let's stay pretentious for a while. 42nd Street essentially says to you, I'm going to give you song after song after song after song after song, and does precisely that. And if you're in a theatre, you're going to get those songs one after the other. That is a cumulative effect. On the live stream, it doesn't quite work like that. You can pause the stream to go off and make a cup of tea or have a meal or come back another day and finish it that way. So you lose the continuity immediately. The thread is cut. But even if you watch it through, as I did, the atmosphere just isn't quite there. My next point is number 9, and it's a question. How unprofessional is Peggy? She is the person who ultimately becomes the star of the show. But what we see of her is pretty unimpressive, I think. The very first time we see her, she is late for an audition. And she's not even late for an audition because of the trains or some external factor. She got to the theatre on time and then was too frightened to go in to audition. And by the time she'd plucked up courage, the auditions were over. Therefore, she didn't initially get a role in Pretty Lady. If I was Julia Marsh, and this is a Julia Marsh show, damn it, that's not the kind of actress I'd be looking for. And then, although we're told she's a magnificent dancer, she doesn't half seem to be clumsy on her feet. Quite early on, she bumps into people, and then later, of course, she accidentally bumps into Dorothy Brock with such force and ferocity that she manages to break Dorothy Brock's ankle. That's not just a mild slip-up. That is a rhinoceros in dancing pumps. And then further unprofessionalism is demonstrated, I think, by the fact that she has these odd relationships. Whether they amount to anything, it's not quite clear, but the answer seems to be not. But with her juvenile lead and the producer. One or the other would be understandable in the hot house of theatre, where relationships do take place, but to have two at the same time? And of course she faints all the time, and it turns out she faints ostensibly because she's not looking after herself or she's being overworked. But once again, it doesn't suggest that she's at tip-top physical condition, as an actress ought to be. Peggy is really very unimpressive, which is all the stranger because we're told all the way through that she is the most impressive actress anyone's ever seen. And my final point is a wrap-up point. And it really pulls together some of the points I've made about 42nd Street, the stage musical. It is a bastardised version of the film, and the film is, I think, superior. However, the stage version is doing something different ultimately, and if you're happy to go in with what it's doing, which is to present you with a spectacular of wonderful songs from the 1920s and 30s, then it is a good show. And that, I think, is my conclusion. 42nd Street, the musical, may not mean much, but it is a good show. Good show. Musical talk. Well, there we are. Our bumper episode starts to grind to an end. Bump and grind. Well, there we are. Didn't expect that. What you just heard there, of course, was my 10-point review of the stage production of 42nd Street, which you could have seen in London 2 years ago at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. And I did. But you could have seen it also again, and you still can, online. Before that, of course, the wonderful Michael Gordon Shapiro in conversation with me about Jekyll Versus Hyde, and therefore before that, you heard Laurence Owen and Lindsay Sharman talking about their show, Jekyll Versus Hyde, an absolute 5-star show as far as musical talk was concerned then, and still now. And once again, as Tom Arnold observed last week, if you want to have an experience of that show, you can, because its soundtrack stroke score, at least its recording, is available on Spotify and elsewhere online. And I must say, I think it would be remiss of me not to let you know that if you're interested in the work of Lindsay and Laurence, they haven't allowed the terrible year 2020 to get in the way of their creativity. There's been no Edinburgh Festival show, of course, because there was no Edinburgh Festival. But they have produced a really well-respected, wonderful series of drama podcasts called Mockery Manor, which have been mopping up positive reviews and awards left, right and centre. So, although not necessarily musical theatre, although it does contain songs by Laurence, I would strongly recommend that you give Mockery Manor a good look. Or possibly, as it's an audio thing, a good listen. Perhaps that's slightly more accurate. And making a rookie error like that clearly means that I'm tired, and if I'm tired, you're going to be sick and tired of the sound of my voice. So let's bring that particular situation to a happy ending. Do join us again next week for another episode of Musical Talk, but I'm going to finish this one now to maximise the gap between this point and that, so you can go off and enjoy your own life. So, how can I bring this episode to an end? You know, I know. And if that's the case, I'm not going to do anything unsurprising. So here's me being utterly predictable. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited by Thos and presented by Thos and Michael Gordon Shapiro. Copyright Musical Talk 2020, except for the songs, where the copyright remains with Lindsay Sharman and Laurence Owen, and my enormous thanks to them for allowing me to play their songs in this episode. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos. Sorry, there's no time for small talk, so if you're happy, we'll go straight in.
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to put that there and then sit.
Yes,
we might get asked for food or something.
Well, I think they think that they know we're doing an interview, don't they?
Oh, okay.
I think so, yeah. Yes.
If not, I'll have 4 cups of tea and then we'll see where we are.
Yes.
And put a chip in it. So, very quickly for levels, obviously a little bit on the hoof. So what did you have for breakfast this morning, Lindsay?
I had a vegan chorizo, which was like the ghost of a chorizo.
All skin.
Yeah.
What about you, sir?
Well, I also had that. It was quite nice.
Yeah, it was fine.
It was nice with a bit of boursin on a bagel. It's rather bourgeois breakfast.
Yeah,
isn't
it
But,
is,
yeah.
isn't it?
Surely if you add cheese, it de-vegans it, doesn't it?
Well, yeah.
yeah.
No, we're very lazy vegans and vegetarians.
Yeah, vegans who eat meat and dairy.
Oh, I'm one of them.